A fish out of water, tackling the pervasive endangerment of the Rio Grande silvery minnow. The Rio Grande silvery minnow, Hypognathus amorous, was officially enlisted as an endangered species in 1994, according to the account of the Endangered Species Act by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It has been officiated by the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish that the species now exists in a span of just 200 miles, an extreme decrease of what used to be 3,000 miles, and occupies a mere 7% of its original habitat along the Albuquerque stretch of the Rio Grande River, which is also known as the Middle Rio Grande area. This population change is directly correlated to habitat disruption. The map to the right shows the habitat shift of the species. The red area is where the silvery minnow is extinct, and the orange is where the species lives as endangered. Habitat changes and thus endangerment can be attributed to the following four threats. The narrowing of the Rio Grande with dams, beginning in 1920, which impacted the ideal habitat of slow, shallow side pools of the river, which the silvery minnow needs to survive. The introduction of invasive species and disease therefrom, climate change, which severely impacts the health of the Rio Grande and contributes to drought, and pollution, which includes domestic and urban water waste, industrial and military effluents, and agricultural and forestry effluents. The Los Lunas Silvery Minnow Refugium and the Albuquerque Biopark's Aquatic Conservation Facility are the two main conservation facilities that breed silvery minnow in large quantities. These programs are responsible for tens of thousands of fish released into the Rio Grande yearly. The Rio Grande Silvery Minnow versus Bureau of Reclamation, also known as the Rio Grande Silvery Minnow versus Keys, was the major state and federal legislation that raised funding for government protection of the species and gave way to the government support of these impactful facilities. Above is a photograph of the Los Lunas Refugium, which is essentially a mini Rio Grande, and below is a photo of an ecologist at the Biopark Conservatorium. After the 1999 Rio Grande Silvery Minnow versus Bureau of Reclamation, the fate of the silvery minnow looked promising. The state of New Mexico and its contracted wildlife agencies have since spent a total of $150 million on the restoration of the Rio Grande silvery minnow. Yet, despite the major fish hatcheries in Los Lunas and at the biopark, along with the immense monetary investment to improve water quality, the population of the silvery minnow continues to be in decline, as the Middle Rio Grande area struggles to sustain the ideal habitat and life for the species. This is an urgent local issue that demands action. I propose to the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish to consider implementing a 5-year, 3-step plan that 1. Tackles a new approach of conservation techniques, 2. Increases government funding to continue sustaining habitat along the Rio Grande area, and 3. Suggests the investment in a long-term educational program regarding endangerment of local wildlife, suitable for children in New Mexican schools and modeled after the current wildlife program at the Bosque School. Project Plan. Step 1. Reintroduce silvery minnow populations outside of the Middle Rio Grande area in order to promote new population growth where historic habitat used to reside, such as in northern and southern New Mexico. Step 2. Stabilize current habitat along the Middle Rio Grande area with pragmatic increases in funding from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. Step 3. Design a long-term curricula, as modeled by current curriculum at the Bosque School, that can be implemented in New Mexico schools. A curricula that approaches topics of wildlife and conservation and is accessible for all ages. As mentioned, the state of New Mexico has already spent a total of $150 million on conservation initiatives for the Rio Grande silvery minnow. It would be in the state's best interest to therefore invest in any promising projects, considering that a large investment in the local species population has already been spent. Local ecologist Dr. Dan Shaw, who is himself an educator at the Bosque School and has a lifetime of experience in ecological conservation projects in the greater Southwest area, has assisted in crafting a budget for this three-step approach. All three steps of this proposal combined will not exceed $6,855,000, which is less than a quarter of what has already been spent. These costs can be allocated to their respective duties in a span of 5 years. Here is the budget for the 5-year three-step conservation for the Rio Grande silvery minnow. With 44% of the overall budget is the reintroduction of species in their historical habitats along the river, which will total $3 million. With 55% of the overall budget is the step of improving and sustaining habitat along the middle Rio Grande to Albuquerque stretch of the river, which will total $3,800,000. And with a small yet significant 1% of the overall budget is the design and implementation of educational curricula, which will total $55,000. In conclusion, this proposal urges the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, along with all New Mexicans of all ages, to be more proactive in conserving our local ecological landscape. The Rio Grande silvery minnow may be a discrete, insignificant fish to many, but how we handle its near extinction will be a good indication of how we handle other environmental disasters to come. Not only is an increase in government funding from the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish necessary, but investing in children, our future, is just as important. I propose that children across the state will learn the importance of conservation and activism. The photo above is of Bosque School students capturing Rio Grande silvery minnow in nets to later deliver them to fish hatcheries. This is a part of their regular science curriculum, and if this proposal is passed, more schools will follow this awesome lesson plan.